Welcome to episode 12 of the Republic Brothers podcast. We're cutting through the noise and defending the truth. I'm Mike, joined by my brother Matt, and we break down the issues that matter most to conservatives. Today, we're diving headfirst into election night. The votes are in, the dust is settling, and the political landscape just shifted. Who won? Who stumbled? And what does it mean for America going forward? Not just tonight, but for the next decade. Just the truth, straight analysis, and maybe a few reality checks. Let's get started. Okay, Matt, so I want to kick the show off with a few things real quick. We had a conversation on the last podcast about Nick Fuentes. We then tried to post a clip from that show on TikTok. Now, TikTok immediately flagged the video and took it down just because we said the name Nick Fuentes. Then we discovered you can't even search for him on TikTok. It will show 0 search results and a message that says this phrase is associated with hateful behavior. To make things clear, our upload was not in support of Fuentes. We spent roughly 15 minutes talking about all the bad things that he said and done, so we obviously are not supporters. We also posted the whole conversation about Fuentes on YouTube. Now, the comments section was clearly found by some of his followers, his groypers as we called them. Here were just a few of the comments. Nick is a G. Everyone loves Nick. The future is now, old man. Jew. Nothing else, just the word Jew. Israel did 9/11. Shut up, Jew. Shut up, you fake conservative. So clearly the groypers found the video. They have 2 brain cells, and both of them are fighting for 3rd place. For anyone who wants to hear some of the other vile stuff that Fuentes has said, go listen to episode 2309 of The Ben Shapiro Show. Ben talks about Fuentes being on Tucker Carlson's show and plays a bunch of clips on all the stuff that Fuentes has said, so you can hear all this stuff for yourself. Actual clips of him saying the N-word, talking about killing Jews and praising Hitler, and all kinds of hateful stuff.
I find it quite funny. For those listening who don't actually know us, we are not Jewish. And it's very important for the Republican Party to not let individuals like Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson take over the messaging for our party. They are really far out there. They are the kinds that you wish would go away and stop talking. Tucker is getting to be just as bad as Nick is, in my opinion. We know Tucker's taking a paycheck from the Russians. We should do everything we can to prevent them from taking over the party.
Yeah, I agree. They are not the voices that we want to lead the party, but I digress. So let's get in our government shutdown update. I feel like we've done a bunch of these. It's officially been 36 days. The administration is funding WIC with tariff money, but not SNAP. So there's a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo as to why they can't use the tariff money to fund SNAP. The United States Department of Agriculture has announced there is a contingency fund with about $5 billion set aside for SNAP when the regular funding lapses, but the USDA has not committed to using it to make a full issuance. States are already being warned of partial benefits or delays. A recent court order directed the USDA to use those contingency funds to issue at least partial benefits for November, but the situation remains uncertain, and a lot of reports are stating that it may take weeks to figure out how to distribute even these reduced payments. Now, Matt, the part I want to get your take on here is the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy and the FAA Administrator Brian Bedford saying the government will reduce airline traffic by 10% at 40 high-traffic airports on Friday if the government is not reopened. This is being done to take some of the pressure off of the controllers who are continuing to work without pay.
Yeah, no big surprise here. This was always going to happen the longer it went on. It's known that there are controllers calling in sick so that they can go do something else to make money. I said weeks ago that this would happen if it dragged out. Most people don't have an emergency fund to last them months, and we're over a month on this shutdown, so paychecks not coming in is really hurting people. It is terrible that they have to keep working with no paycheck. because you have some people calling in sick to go make money doing something else, that's really putting pressure on the ones who are still working. So reducing traffic will lighten that load and lead to a little bit less fatigue. But the longer this goes, the worse it's going to get, and the more they will have to reduce airline traffic.
Have you seen some of the videos of these crazy lines at some of these airports? I mean, people, like, they're out the doors trying to get checked in through TSA. They're out the door into, like, the drop-off loop, and they're just back and forth weaving, stacked up out in the parking lot.
Yeah, it's not a massive surprise. I mean, they are very short-staffed at this point, and we mentioned last episode how long the delays were, how often planes are delayed or flights are just outright canceled. That's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I really hope that things get better because I'm supposed to fly for work in December. So hopefully this shutdown is over long before then.
Well, you got the holiday season starting with Thanksgiving. If it's not over before that, holiday travel is going to be a disaster.
Yeah, and I saw a quote from somebody online. I don't remember who it was. Oh, it was Charlemagne the God was saying, Democrats, you have lost this shutdown. You've lost. Just give it up. Get everybody back to work. Start paying everybody. Fund SNAP. It's officially over. You lost this battle.
But it's a bad look for Democrats, is it not, if they just sign the continuing resolution without getting anything? They went through 36, it'd probably be 40 days before it ends. If they get nothing out of this, it's a terrible look, and the more progressive side of the party will not be happy. And we've said before, that's why I don't think some of the Democrats will vote yes, because they're terrified of getting primaried.
But do you actually think that any of the Republicans are going to back down on any of this stuff? Or are they just going to stick their head in the ground and say, no, we're not budging?
I'm going to guess they're going to keep their head in the ground and not budge. But it's worth noting, this continuing resolution only funded the government through November 21st. So there was still going to be an opportunity for Democrats to negotiate on this stuff. They wouldn't have had to have waited long to get another crack at it. At this point, I think some of them should start to turn their attention to a full bill for a year. You can reopen the government, but that'd be, 15 days?
Yeah. I saw a video online of somebody explaining the shutdown and what the Democrats were actually fighting for, and how there's all this misinformation about it's not about illegal immigrants and things like that, but yet there is a government website in California for Medicare, or, their whole Medicare, Medicaid system in California, on their website that specifically states, I can't remember the exact date, I want to say it was January 1st maybe, that illegal immigrants were no longer eligible for this health care. But as of right now, it says that anyone is eligible for it, or it says, women and children or whatever it is, are eligible for it regardless of their immigration status. And then it goes on to say that on this date, you will no longer be eligible unless you're a citizen. So that is part of what they are arguing about.
Well, and it's worth noting, these subsidies were put in during COVID, and they put an expiration date on it. This was the Biden administration, not the Trump administration. They put an expiration date on it because it was only supposed to be temporary. But here they are arguing that they should be extended even longer.
Yeah, and it's a subsidy. They injected all this money into Obamacare to make it cheaper, and now they don't want these prices to spike. But if you think about it, you've been paying for it all along anyway with your taxes. That's where the money came from in order to bring these prices down. I'm sure most people remember a time where you got charged extra if you didn't have health care. If you didn't have health insurance, you were charged extra on your taxes. That's where they got the money to make it cheaper for everyone else.
Well, that's the best way to do it. Tell them you'll give it to them for free, but then add in a charge somewhere else, like their taxes, that they won't connect the dots to. We do it with a lot of things. California has wildfire insurance because the independent companies won't do any new policies. But that money has to come from somewhere, and it comes from taxes. Everyone in California pays for it when they have to pay out.
Yeah, hopefully we will see this government shutdown, come to a halt and, we'll get something figured out. But until then, let's move on to the biggest reason we're here tonight. Let's talk about the election winners from last night. Before we get into the actual winners, though, I do want to mention California voted yes on Prop 50. For anyone who doesn't know, Prop 50 allows the legislature, controlled by the Democrats, to temporarily take over the map drawing from California's Independent Commission, which was created to draw more fair and nonpartisan maps. Prop 50 arms the Democrats with a temporary power boost in the House, but it also risks triggering a retaliation cycle in red states. In my opinion, the question isn't if, it's when. So, Matt, did California make a mistake with Prop 50?
Probably not. They kind of did this as a response to Texas. For those that don't know, Texas is redrawing its map, and it would gain seats for Republicans. California is kind of doing this to offset that. The reality is you can look at almost every state in the country. Just look at the lines that were drawn for these congressional districts. Most states are gerrymandered. It just depends who's in power when they draw the map. It's not a surprise they did it because they see it as an existential crisis that they need to win in 2026. They believe that if they don't take back the House, Trump will have 2 more years of his presidency to push through the things he wants. Of course, they see him as a dictator, so they have to go get democratically elected to stop him. Ultimately, I think it'll end up being a wash because Democratic states will do it and Republican states will do it. I would just encourage every Republican in California to leave the state. California has the most registered Republicans of any state, and it really doesn't look like their votes matter. If you could get the millions of Republicans in California to move to places like Texas or Pennsylvania or North Carolina, you would turn those states solid red, and their votes would matter more. Now, we're going to get into the individual races we saw over the last 24 hours come to an end. We'll start with New Jersey. Mikey Sherrill defeats Jack Ciattarelli 56-43, so not particularly close. New Jersey is a very blue state, so it was always going to be an uphill battle for Jack Ciattarelli. Not a massive surprise here for me.
I thought I heard a lot of people saying that Ciattarelli was getting some traction and that he had a chance, but this looks like he just got run over.
Yeah, he did get run over in this one. It wasn't that close. Republican turnout, for the most part, in this election cycle wasn't good. It is an off year, so you would expect lower turnouts, but Republicans really didn't show up.
We'll move on to the next one. Obviously, we have a lot more to say about Zohran Mamdani, so we're going to save him for last. Don't worry, we're getting to him. But next, we're going to talk about Abigail Spanberger. So Spanberger won the 2025 Virginia gubernatorial election, defeating Winsome Earl Sears with roughly 57% of the vote. She'll be the first female governor of Virginia. Now, she did run as a moderate Democrat. We'll see if she stays that way. I want to point out the absolute hypocrisy from Barack Obama. He sat with a group of black men months ago and told them that they all needed to vote and support the black woman. But this time around, he told everyone to vote for the white woman. He made it about race several months ago, but this time it was only about the letter next to Spanberger's name.
Well, they push that DEI stuff, but when the person doesn't think the right way in their opinion, they are not concerned with what race you are. You are spot on that Obama told people vote black, but this kind of exposes the hypocrisy of the left. When the black woman is on the right, you can't vote for her.
Yeah. Just to get into a little bit of Spanberger's policy positions and a lot of the things that she ran on, one of the things I wanted to bring up was on voting rights. She has said that she is committed to safeguarding free and fair access and opposes efforts that might restrict ballot access. Now, I have kind of a concern about this. I'll put it this way. I don't know exactly what she's referring to, but my assumption would be is that she's against voter ID. Now, I could be wrong, but That's what this sounds like to me, is that she doesn't believe that you should need an ID to vote. She's of the mindset that, like the old Democrats from a couple elections ago were saying, was that requiring an ID was racist. But that's kind of how I'm taking her stance on voting rights. What do you think about that?
It'll be interesting to see how it turns out, because on most things, she ran as a moderate Democrat who is against Trump. We'll see if it turns out that way or if she was just playing the part to get elected. It does kind of sound to me like free and fair access could potentially mean no voter ID. It's a bit of an insult to not require people to have an ID to vote, given how easy it is to get a government ID. But we'll see how she plays it.
Yeah. One of the other things she emphasized was strengthening public education, including recruiting and fairly compensating teachers rather than shifting funds toward private school vouchers. A subsection of that was expanding access to college-level courses for high school students and increasing affordability of higher education. Now, she wants to grow programs that let high school students earn college credits early. Her reasoning is early credits means less student debt and more readiness for workforce or college. She also emphasized short-term career pathways for things like nursing, the trades, apprenticeship tracks, tech, and cyber programs. Now, I do like this. I think it's a good thing if kids can earn college credits while they're in high school. I think it does help. And especially her whole thing on the trades and apprenticeship tracks. We need people in trades. A lot of people on the right think that college is a scam. I tend to lean that way as well. I don't think there's a lot of things that college is really doing for you. I understand there are some occupations where you need a degree, like a lawyer or a doctor. I understand that. But for the most part, a lot of people go to college, they rack up a bunch of debt, and then they get a degree in something that they never end up doing.
Yeah, I like what she said. We'll see how she implements it. Anything that encourages people to go the route of a trade, like a plumber or a welder, is a good thing. And yeah, on the college part, I would agree with you. It's a scam for a lot of people. There's a lot of useless degrees. I would understand why you would go to college to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. But if you're going for gender studies, you're just wasting time and money.
Yeah, a lot of people see college as an experience and not as a place to learn. It's a place to go and hang out with your friends and get drunk and just fool around.
And businesses recently have started to say that college graduates aren't really prepared for the workforce. They still need a lot of training after they come out of college.
Speaking of the school stuff, one of the other things she was running on was removing the quote-unquote culture war distractions in schools and letting educators focus on teaching curriculum that's rooted in facts. Now, I'd like to know exactly what facts she means here. I agree with her. School should not be about politics, but unfortunately, everyone from the top down in some of these schools is pushing their own views on these impressionable children. I do not want my children coming home from school and telling me about how such and such teacher was telling them about their sexual relationship or how it was okay to be this or that or whatever the case may be. There are certain conversations that parents need to have with their children, and I don't want the school or anyone from the school giving my children those kind of lessons.
Yeah, I agree with what she says, and removing the cultural things would be a good thing. You are supposed to be in school for an education, not an indoctrination, but we are seeing a lot of indoctrination. If she's going to remove all of it, that would be great. Getting rid of the LGBTQ stuff would be a very good thing. It is kind of ruining some people's lives, and they're very young, very impressionable, and can be easily confused by these things. You're not convincing a 65-year-old man today that he's a woman, but you could convince a 7-year-old that he's the opposite gender. So if we can get rid of this, it would be great. But again, we'll see if she is the moderate she claimed to be.
Yeah, time will tell. On her next thing, she supports the Affordable Care Act and advances a public option style plan via the Medicare X Choice concept. Now, This is a public option for healthcare, and to me, it sounds like a disaster. Let's ask our retired military how they feel about the government-run VA. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk positively about the VA. They all talk about how the wait times are crazy. You got to talk to 4 different people before you can get anything accomplished. Government-run healthcare to compete with private healthcare sounds good in theory, giving some competition to these private companies. But if it's government-run, I fear there'll be a bunch of red tape, wait times will be crazy, et cetera, et cetera. What's your take on this whole idea?
Everything sounds great when you say the government can come in and help, but the government really isn't good at much. Somebody has to pay for these services, and it will be all of us. It sounds good in theory, like you said, but usually they end up being very expensive. It's likely that's what this would be. It sounds like a good idea, and I understand why she would support it, but these things usually don't work out. Obamacare has not worked, and this would likely just be another example of that.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the other things she said, I find this kind of funny and a little bit ironic. So she does not support defunding the police. She emphasizes public safety, training for law enforcement, and community trust. Now, this includes de-escalation techniques, crisis response training, i.e. mental health and addiction, and community engagement training. So all of that said, her immigration stance kind of counteracts what she said about not wanting to defund the police. She's pledging to rescind the directive that local law enforcement assist federal immigration raids. So she does not want to defund the police, but she doesn't want the police to protect and assist federal law enforcement. This seems like she's landing on both sides of the fence here. Of course, you don't want to defund the police, but why would you not want them to help federal officers trying to remove criminals from your state? Make it make sense.
Well, you can't. I think that's mostly just playing politics. Most people are fully aware it's a terrible idea to defund the police. So you kind of have to say you don't want to defund the police. But given how in love with illegal immigrants the left is, you can't let your police departments assist immigration or any kind of federal law enforcement, because that's a bad look as well. It's very much trying to stay right in the middle and not make anyone mad.
Well, moving on from Spanberger a little bit, I just wanted to bring up Jay Jones winning the Virginia Attorney General. Now, if you recall, this is the same guy who was sending text messages about his opponent getting 2 bullets in the head and calling children fascists. This guy is now the Attorney General of Virginia. The awful things this guy said, and none of these Democrats would pull their support from him. They said he did a bad thing and condemned the text, but basically said it's still okay to vote for him. In one of the debates that Spanberger did, they flat out asked her if she would pull her support for him, and it's like she glitched during the debate. Like she just could not figure out a way to get out of answering this question. And she still never fully gave an answer to the question.
It's a bit of a shock to see he got elected, but when you look at the numbers, some Democrats did pull their support for Jay Jones. When you look at how comfortably Spanberger won the governor's race, she kind of pulled him across the line. She won by about 13 percentage points. He won by about 6. So some Democrats did switch and vote on the other side of the ticket. I don't know how you feel about that, but if a Republican did the same thing as Jay Jones, they are done.
Yeah, I would like to think that if a Republican would have done the same thing, most Republicans would have been like, man, you can't say stuff like that and get away with it. But the fact that he was able to say this stuff and then still get elected, there were no consequences for his actions. He got away with it, which is absurd.
Well, we do have one example in George Santos when he won, and then it turned out he lied and committed fraud and all these other things. Most Republicans did call on him to resign.
Well, shifting gears, let's get into probably our biggest conversation tonight. Zohran Mamdani won the race for New York City mayor. He won approximately 50.4% of the votes. Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa combined for just over 1 million votes. They were 34,919 votes shy of Mamdani. Lots of people were calling for Sliwa to drop out of the race, fearing he'd just be taking votes away from Cuomo. But in the end, it doesn't look like it mattered. Even if every single one of Sliwa's 146,137 votes went to Cuomo, it still would have been almost 35,000 votes short. Mamdani calls himself a democratic socialist, but that's pretty much just a cover for his communist views. This guy's all about taking from the rich to give to the poor, and he's not shy about it. He wants everything to be run by the government so they control everything you do. He wants you to need him, and he wants you to need daddy government.
He is all for equality, but he's not going to be able to drag people up the scale of wealth, so he has to bring the top down to match the bottom.
So let's jump into his policy positions here. We're going to be able to pick this apart for a while, I think. So number one on the list was his advocacy for a rent freeze for many renters and expansion of affordable housing units. Now, to me, this just seems like he's trying to mess with supply and demand, and it's not going to work. If you're freezing rent on some people, you're going to cause rent to go up for others. And part of that is him proposing a creation of a social housing development. For example, he wants to put in about 200,000 units over the next 10 years around transit hubs and upzoning in wealthier neighborhoods.
It's an interesting thought, but someone might want to ask him, if you freeze rents so contractors can only charge so much for the properties, why would you build it? Not to mention, there's a ton of red tape in New York, so it would take decades to get this done.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff that pops up about his whole social housing program and, you know, the rent freezes and all that, and I feel like we'll get into that later. One of the biggest things here is his support for raising the minimum wage. His target is $30 an hour. He wants to pay the guy pouring my coffee $30 an hour.
He actually wants $30 an hour?
$30 an hour within the next 4 to 5 years.
Someone should tell him go look at California when they raised their minimum wage to $20 an hour. It incentivized businesses that had labor that wasn't a massive value add to innovate and turn to technology to replace the humans. Rather than constantly paying $20 an hour for someone to take your order, they spent tens of thousands of dollars one time to just get rid of that position. California did see people making more money, but they saw a lot of people lose their jobs because of it.
Yeah, and you see it already in places like McDonald's. You walk into a McDonald's and you walk up to a kiosk and you're doing their job for them. And then they still have the gall to ask you for a tip at the end.
Yeah, this will just drive businesses to cut jobs, especially increasing it that fast. That is far above inflation. That would do a lot of harm to small businesses.
Now, on top of the $30 an hour minimum wage, he's proposing higher taxes on wealthy residents and corporations to fund social care programs, childcare, affordable housing, public transit. New York already has high taxes compared to other places, and Mamdani wants to tax people even more to pay for all of his ideas. I even saw him talking about wanting to tax these corporations that try to leave New York and taxing them even if they just do business in New York. Now, I'm no lawyer, but that doesn't sound like something he can actually do.
Well, anything to get money into the system. Did you know, Michael, that in New York, New York's version of the IRS has thousands of employees dedicated to tracking where wealthy individuals are at any given time? Because if they can prove you're in the state long enough, they can tax all of your income. The other part to that, Zohran might want to think this through. There is a tipping point where taxes get so high that wealthy people leave. After all, they're called wealthy people. They have money. They're the ones that can afford to leave. He wants this, but I don't think he's actually going to get this. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has already said she's not raising taxes in New York. I think this is one of his wishes that he won't get, and as we've said, he's going to need money for all of these ideas he has. My theory is the first line in the budget to get cut is going to be the police department's budget. That will be how he pays for some of his ideas, and the people of New York will be the ones that suffer.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up one of his other policy points, his critiques on the over-reliance of policing. He's emphasizing investment in community services like mental health teams and a Department of Community Safety that responds to non-violent calls. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, there are a lot of non-violent calls that turn violent. There is no true way to know if a call is going to turn violent or not. Now, in the area we are, the police department has what's called community service officers. Now, these officers show up when you get into an accident. They help people change tires on the side of the road. They help direct traffic, things like that. Now, if that's what Mamdani's talking about, then okay, fine. But those are not 911 calls, generally. Those are calls that people are calling the direct number to the police department and saying, hey, there's a car on the side of the road and, they might need some help or something. Nobody's calling in about a disturbance or a noise complaint, for example. Somebody calls in a noise complaint. At first, no, that does not sound like a violent call. But what happens when this community service officer shows up or this Department of Community Safety shows up and they're like, hey, you got to turn the music down. And then the people get loud and rowdy. Now what? Now you got to call the real police anyway. So I'm not 100% sure what his plans are with this, but I hope they think this one through a little bit more.
It's always interesting to hear people come up with these ideas, but how do you know the nonviolent call will not turn violent?
Yeah.
I think it would just be best if you hired more police officers so that their workload wasn't so extreme and they had more time for training. I'm all for more training. Training will make them better, but there's not a ton of cops, and it's my opinion, we don't live in New York. I would like to see our police department running ads in New York City, advertising jobs here for the people of New York who might want to come down south and be a police officer for us. We'll happily take you.
Well, next on Mamdani's list is his support for a fare-free bus service and wider transit fare reductions to ease burdens on the lower-income New Yorkers. Now, again, it sounds good in theory, but us Republicans are real good about asking the follow-up question. Who's going to pay for that?
Again, that's one I think's coming out of the police budget. The problem is the buses are not likely to be safe.
Yeah, I think you're right. They got to cut the money from someone, somewhere, or you got to tax people more money to pay for it. But at some point, it's not free. It's never free. Somebody's got to pay for it.
Yep.
That kind of leads us into the next point, too, is his support for universal pre-kindergarten and expansion of child care supports, like baby baskets and nursing supplies for new families. Once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record by the end of this, but who's going to pay for that? Why are we sending these supplies to new families? If you make the conscious decision to have a baby, that's up to you to pay for it, not me. I have my own children. I had to pay for everything myself. Why am I having to pay for your kids?
It's interesting to me. You've just listed off how many different policy proposals of his, and all of them are free.
Yeah, they're all free. And again, who's going to pay for that?
Well, my prediction would be the wealthy people until they leave.
Yeah, he wants a 2% increase on the 1%ers in New York.
I've seen news articles where people are already trying to take their kids out of public schools in New York City. The New York Post had an article about a week ago that said 26% of New Yorkers would try to flee the state if Mamdani won.
Yeah, I mean, can you blame them? They're at a point now where it sounds like somebody's going to be dipping their hand in their pockets.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to live in New York, the city or the state.
So, given all the policy stuff we've talked about with Mamdani, ultimately, how do you see Mamdani's win affecting the city of New York in the short term and the long term?
I think most of the effects will be negative. He's made it kind of clear that he wants to change how policing is done, which will make things more dangerous. He wants a lot of free things that he's going to struggle to pay for. So a lot of services are going to get cut so that he can get free buses and stuff like that. I do think this is an interesting point, though. Rudy Giuliani was once the mayor of New York City. As a Republican, the city got so bad that New Yorkers voted for and then reelected multiple times a Republican. Is this kind of that moment where New Yorkers will eventually wake up and see how bad things are and want drastic change? Because ultimately, once Giuliani left, they voted for Democrats again, and it's starting to go downhill. Now, the point I also want to make is just how bad of a look this is for the GOP and independents in the state of New York and in New York City. A socialist won the election outright, had more than 50% of the vote. Andrew Cuomo is finished in politics. People are clearly done with him, and there's not much to run for at this point for Cuomo. Curtis Sliwa, he was the Republican nominee, and he wasn't even challenged in the primaries. Not a good look. That's how weak the Republicans are in New York City, in the state of New York. And it's also worth noting that for someone like myself or for Mike, this really doesn't have a big impact on us. On the national level, Mamdani doesn't really matter, but it's likely to be bad for the city.
Well, let's zoom out from New York a little bit. So what's our takeaways? What's our bullet points? What's our full breakdown of all the election winners and losers that we saw from Tuesday?
Yeah, overall, a very good night for Democrats. In particular, the moderate ones who ran quite hard against President Trump and his agenda. I know Mamdani's going to get most of the headlines because of how radical he is, but Republicans would actually be wise not to push that too much early on. Let him get into office and let it turn into a disaster before you start pushing that hard. There's going to be a lot of talk about this election day being a referendum on Trump, but it's worth noting it's Virginia and New Jersey governor seats that were up for grabs. Those are generally quite blue states. Both of them voted for Biden, and both of them voted for Harris the last election. So while it's not a good look that these races weren't very close, it's also not a huge deal given how low Republican turnout was. Trump's name wasn't on the ballot, so Trump wasn't there to kind of drag people to the polls. The other thing is the government shutdown. It most definitely did not help Republicans, and as I've said before, the party in power usually takes the hit for shutdowns. So between a government shutdown, Trump's name not on the ballot, and Democrats turning out in record numbers for an off-year election with no presidential election on the ballot, and Republicans not coming out in big numbers, it's not a massive surprise when you look at the data that the races went the way they did. My thoughts on this is it wasn't really a referendum on Trump because most of them were blue states. 2026 will be a referendum on Donald Trump, though. How will that go? We don't know. Again, Trump wasn't on the ballot, so his supporters didn't really turn out in numbers. The Republicans would be wise to focus more on the things people feel the most, which is the things that impact their wallet. You've probably noticed the news cycle for the last few months has been a lot of foreign policy and a lot of tariffs, which is news that helps people, but they don't feel it right away, so it doesn't make any impact. Those were wins for Trump in a lot of cases, but it doesn't help people's wallets right away, and that hurts him because people were starting to think the person who ran on lowering costs has forgotten about that and shifted his attention to something else. I think Republicans would be wise to shift the focus closer to home and focus on the economy more. You can still do all the foreign policy stuff as you need to, but try to get the attention back on the economy and what you're doing to help people. And I think the ultimate takeaway is you need a good candidate to run for office. You need someone to point out the lunacy of some of the left, because there's still some very progressive people that are going to be running in 2026, and you need a candidate who can point that out.
Yeah, I think we just kind of have to let things play out. Like you said, let Mamdani wreck the city for a little while before we start attacking him and the things that he's doing. Let him show everyone all the things that he's doing so then we can point it out. This was not a particularly good election for Republicans. Hopefully, we'll see that turn around the next time.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, 2026, you'll hear a lot of talk about the House of Representatives, but you're not going to hear a lot about the Senate. 2026 is going to be brutal for Democrats because there's not a lot of Republicans up for re-election in 2026 on the Senate side, keeping in mind that's 6-year terms. It's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for Democrats to swing the Senate, which is why there's going to be so much focus on the House.
Yeah, we'll see how this all shakes out. Let's get to the end of the show here. So we're going to do our blind ranking as always, but this time Matt is going to give me some names. So Matt, give us the category and fire away.
I got a good one here for you, Mike. We're going to see how you think about these people. These are the top Democratic candidates for president in 2028. I'm going to let you decide how you rank them. You can rank them based on how good of a candidate they are or who you would most like to see. Just let us know which one.
Okay.
So name number 1. Everybody knows him, Gavin Newsom.
So I feel like Gavin Newsom is the front runner. So I have to kind of decide here how I want to rank them. I think it's going to be who I think has the best chance to win. How about that?
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to do it, based on who I think has the best chance to win and kind of who their best candidates are. Now, obviously, I do not like Gavin Newsom, but I do believe that he is the front runner. So I'm going to put him at 1.
Going number 1 right away. Okay.
Yep, I'm going to put him at 1.
The next name, J.B. Pritzker.
Oh, Pritzker. Man, that's a tough one. I'm going to put Pritzker at 3. That could be do or die right there. I'm going to go 3 for Pritzker.
Third name on the list, everyone's favorite, Pothole Pete Buttigieg.
There's a lot of stuff you can say about Pete, so I'm going to put him at 4.
Next name on the list, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro.
Okay, I'm going to put Shapiro at 2 because I think the last one's going to be really bad.
And why would I do that to you? And your number 5 is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Nailed it. Perfect list. Nailed it.
Given you went by most likely to win, I probably would have swapped Newsom and Shapiro. But I'm not so sure.
Potentially, yeah.
A Jew could win on the Democrat side.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? I think Newsom has, the pretty boy looks and the talking, and he's real good about, he says Trump's name 87 times every time he gives a press conference. Like everything he says has to do with Donald Trump. And I think a lot of Democrats are going to be like, oh yeah, he's going after Donald Trump. So that's why I think Newsom is 1.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting because California is a bit of a disaster, so that could come back to bite him. Hopefully.
I would really like to see a debate with J.D. Vance and Gavin Newsom. I think J.D. Vance would run all over him. Obviously, Democrats wouldn't see it that way, but I feel like J.D. could really give a lot of talking points that Gavin would just kind of skirt around. But all in all, I think I nailed it.
Yeah, you did well there.
So, all right, well, that's the end of episode 12 of the Republic Brothers podcast. Here's our wrap up. Government shutdown is now on day 36, and we did a full breakdown of the biggest winners and losers from Tuesday night. If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to follow the Republic Brothers podcast on social media, leave us a rating, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share this episode with a friend. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.